Hello! In this module we are going to learn about negation, which basically means not. We're going to learn about the grammar and the meaning of a negation sign that we're going to add to our logical language. We're going to learn how negations and conditionals interact. We're going to learn about double negations as part of learning about the grammar and meaning of the negation sign. And then we'll learn how to symbolize with negation and how to do derivations with negation. So let's get going. So we have this phrase in English, it is not the case that. And so we could say he will not confess. That means basically the same thing as it is not the case that he will confess. And it is not the case that he will confess, that is the negation of he will confess. The bigger sentence denies the shorter sentence. It says that the shorter sentence is false. So it is not the case that expresses the negation. It does so in English. And we can attach it to any sentence, and by doing so we form the negation of that initial sentence. So we're going to have a negation sign in our logical language. It's the tilde, although it doesn't go over ends and so on. It's going to go in, we're going to see how it works, but it basically means it is not the case that. And so if, for example, x symbolizes he will confess, then negation x or tilde x symbolizes it is not the case that he will confess. It could also symbolize he won't confess. Right? It is not the case that he will confess and he won't confess. Those mean basically the same thing. They're different ways of saying the same thing. And but in our symbolizations, we're not going to try to capture those grammatical differences. We'll just symbolize them both the same way as negation x. So we're going to have a new sign, this tilde sign, and we need to say then we're expanding our logical language, and so we need to say how we're expanding our logical language, how the grammar works. So first we want to list the symbols. So we have the capital letters from P to Z. Those are the sentence letters, which we call the atomic sentences because they do not contain other sentences. Then we have the tilde or the negation sign. That's our new symbol. And then, of course, we're going to have the arrow or the conditional and the parentheses. So we've really just added one sign, the tilde or the negation sign, to our list of symbols. We need to say how we form sentences using this negation sign, so we're going to have more grammatical rules. We have our old rule, every sentence letter is a sentence. We have a new rule that says if circle is a sentence, then if you stick the negation sign on the front, then you have another sentence. So anytime you have a sentence, big or small, you can put a negation on the front and you have a new sentence. Of course, while it's a new sentence, it says the opposite of what circle says, so you've built a new sentence that you might, if you wanted to say circle, you wouldn't say not circle, but maybe you thought circle was false, and then it would be handy to have not circle around and you could say that. And then, of course, we have our old rule for the conditional that says if circle and square are sentences, then parenthesis, circle, arrow, square, parenthesis is also a sentence, and nothing else is a sentence. So we have a new rule too. If we have something that's a sentence, we can form a new sentence by putting a negation sign on the front of it. So we could start with U, which is a sentence letter, and therefore it's an atomic sentence, and so it's a sentence by rule 1. Okay, well, we could stick a negation sign on the front of that. We would build negation U using rule 2. Now, negation U is itself a sentence, and so we can put a negation on the front of it and form a new sentence, negation, negation U. And of course, since negation, negation U is a sentence, we can apply rule 2 again and form another sentence, negation, negation, negation U. So we have U, negation U, double negation U, and triple negation U. Now, you would almost never say the triple negation U. You would just say the single negation U, and frequently you'd be fairly unlikely to say the double negation U if what you meant was just U. So we'll see more about how double negations work later, but these are just 4 different sentences, each with their own grammar according to our new rule. We can also, though, combine negations and conditionals. So we might note that both P and Q, those are sentence letters, and so by our first rule, they're sentences. Our now rule 3 says you can put them together to form the conditional, and then our rule 2 says, hey, you can stick a negation on the front of that. And so what we have is negation, and then the conditional, P arrow Q. So what this thing is it's a negation of a conditional. And so it says, if P then Q, no. It says that the conditional P arrow Q is false. It denies or negates that conditional. We could proceed in a different order. We could start with P as a sentence letter, and then we could add a negation sign onto that using our second rule, building the sentence negation P, which says P is false. We could observe that Q is also a sentence letter and therefore a sentence by rule 1, and now having those two sentences together, not P on the one hand and Q on the other hand, we could build the conditional out of them, getting the conditional if not P, then Q. So this is a conditional. Its antecedent is a negation. So it says if not P, then Q, or put slightly differently, if P is false, Q is true. So we have these two different sentences, both built out of P, Q, and arrow and negation, but they're different sentences, and not only are they different sentences, but they say different things, and they can differ in their truth values. One can be true and the other false. So on the one side, we have negation of if P then Q, so that's a negation. It says a certain conditional, which one, if P then Q, that conditional is false. And then we have a conditional whose antecedent is the negation, not P, and whose consequent is Q, and that says when P is false, Q is true. If P is false, Q is true. So those are different things and they say different things. We're going to learn more in our next video about exactly how they say different things, but I want to close this video off in the discussion of the grammar by talking briefly about official and informal notation. You'll remember that informal notation says is a way of dropping parentheses, and it says when you're done building a sentence, you can drop the very external parentheses. So for example, we have this conditional, parenthesis, negation, P, arrow, Q, parenthesis, it's a conditional. Those parentheses came from the conditional, were added at the last stage of building the sentence, and so since they're on the outside, we can drop them, giving us that. So that on the there on the right side of the screen, that negation P, arrow, Q, that is that's short. That's informal notation for the conditional with the parentheses. What about this? This is a negation. It's a negation of if P then Q. Is there an informal version of this? What do you think? There is no informal version of this because this doesn't have external parentheses. That right parenthesis is on the outside, nothing is outside of it, but the left parenthesis, the negation is outside of it. And since we can only drop external pairs of parentheses, we can't drop those parentheses, and so there is no informal version of that. So what this means, among other things, is that when you see negation P, arrow, Q, and no parentheses, that's always the conditional. Because it's missing, that top thing is in informal notation. It's missing parentheses. When you put them on, they have to go on the outside, and so you end up with a conditional, and the negation in being part of the antecedent. And that thing, negation P, arrow, Q, is never the negation of a conditional. To have the negation of a conditional, it needs to be negation parenthesis P, arrow, Q, parenthesis. So every conditional, there's an informal version of it, but there are no informal versions of sentence letters, and there are no informal versions of negations either, because neither of them have external parentheses. Okay, so we've learned the grammar of our negation sign. When you have a sentence, you can stick a negation on the front of it, and that then says that sentence that the initial one I started with, that I added the negation to, that one is false. That's what the negation says. And as we've seen, you can negate conditionals, you can also negate sentence letters and then put them inside of conditionals, and so on and so forth. Now we want to understand in more detail what is the difference in, I said that these two sentences, negation P, arrow, Q, sorry, the conditional whose antecedent is not P and whose consequent is Q, and the negation of the conditional, that those, they're obviously different sentences because just the negation's in a different place, and one's a negation and one's a conditional, but we want to understand more deeply really what their difference in meaning is, and so we're going to talk about that in the next video.